Monsters. Welcome to another podcast episode and official meeting of our true crime cult. But never fear, you've landed in the cult with all of the cool jumpsuits and none of the doomsday prophecies. In case you don't know us already, allow us to introduce ourselves. I'm your favorite true crime pixie, Angelina, and I'm here with the real housewife of true crime, Aurora.
Hey, spooky friends. Thanks for stopping by. Don't forget, if you want to make it official and join the MMN commune for real, you'll want to find us on Patreon. Head over to patreon.com/MurderMurder.news and pledge any amount to show your support. To show how much we appreciate you, we'll send you some murder merch goodies, give you a shout out on our show, and you'll get exclusive access to our regular Patreon-only video specials.
So let's start off by digging into some of the true crime stories that made headlines this week. Cesar Millan, aka the Dog Whisperer, has found himself in a lawsuit this week after his dog allegedly attacked a woman and killed Queen Latifah's dog. The woman, Lydia Matisse, says she had gone to visit her mother, who worked for Cesar at his training facility in 2017. The dog, Junior, was unleashed and attacked and bit her. She claims Cesar was aware that the dog was violent, as he had attacked other dogs at his facility before. According to her, his dog killed Queen Latifah's dog, and Cesar's staff lied and told her that the dog had been hit by a car.
Ooh, it's so sad for poor Queen Latifah's dog, too.
Yeah,
terrible.
That's terrible. And you know what else? I feel like there's been like a lot of celebrity dog news recently, which is sad. A lot of celebrity dog theft scams or
Lady
dog
Gaga.
attacks.
Right.
Yeah, and I've heard bad things about this Cesar Millan before. I heard that someone said he was abusive to a dog or something like that.
Wow. I have not ever heard anything bad about him, but I'm glad to know these terrible things now. But also, I feel like I'd really like some good celebrity dog news.
Yeah, that would be nice for a change.
Can we have some good news?
Yeah. If anyone knows anything positive about dogs, especially, let us know.
Send us something positive about your dog. It doesn't have to be a celebrity dog.
Yeah.
Just dog, cat, whatever.
Just send us pictures of your dog.
Yes,
yeah. We want
please.
just pet pictures.
I could really use some good news this week. So also in true crime news this week, 2 teens were shot at the Haunted Hills Hayride Saturday night in Pennsylvania. The 2 15-year-olds were shot by an unknown assailant while out with friends getting an early start to their fall festivities. An argument broke out at the ticket booth and the assailant fired 3 times. 15-year-old Stephen Eason was shot in the stomach and chest and was pronounced dead shortly after. The other teen was hospitalized but is in good condition at this time. Police are still searching for the assailant they believe to also be a teenager.
Wow, that's so scary. You know what? I think our friend Fanny has been there to this Haunted Hills Hayride in Pennsylvania.
Wow.
She and a few friends, they do usually Halloween road trips to go to haunted houses around the Halloween season. And they've done a little tour of ones that they can drive to from here, I guess, which is so cool. But I guess because of the pandemic, they haven't been able to do that recently. So luckily they weren't there. But wow, that's really scary.
Y'all, we're going to do that. We're going to do some haunted Halloween tourism next year, maybe. It looks like this year's not really going to be much of an improvement. So let's get this in the books. Next year, pencil us in. We're going to go do a haunted tour of some, northern states or something, somewhere close to Montreal.
Definitely pick something spooky, a spooky outing, a spooky little adventure to run off to. That will be the first trip worth planning whenever possible.
Perfect.
We'll be right back after a quick commercial break.
It's been feeling like the travel industry is slowly but surely coming back to life. But I can't help but feel a little cynical about this return to travel. The pandemic is still raging around the world. We're facing the growing consequences of a climate crisis, and we continue to grapple with inequity in our communities. It seems more important than ever to make sure that when we travel, we do it right.
We can still travel and we can still have a good time, and we can we do deserve that time off. We do need to step away from the chaotic day-to-day that we live in. But I think what is really important is that we need to go beyond where we go and what we want to do, and really spend some time thinking about why and how.
There is always where you can see the dots are not connected. Even from a very conscious level of being a human, you can always tell something is not adding up.
This idea that you can do what you want when you travel, that you don't have to be responsible for certain things. It's like, the world is your oyster. The world's not your friggin' oyster. It's important to think to yourself, how do my travel habits and experiences change things?
We all need to realize that our presence has some sort of impact. Sometimes that's positive, sometimes that's negative. By being in a space, we become part of the story in some way.
So where do we start? I'm Erin Hines, travel writer and host of Alpaca My Bags. On this season of the podcast, I'm digging even deeper into what it really means to be a responsible traveler. With the help of my producer, Katie, we'll chat with thought leaders, activists, and passionate travelers, exploring questions like, how important is it to decenter yourself as a traveler? And what does that even mean? How will climate change impact tourism and travel as we know it? And is the era of space tourism here? And if so, is that something we even need? I am itching to book my next adventure, and I'm sure you are too. So there is no better time than now to be having these conversations. Throughout the season, I'll share some of my own travel stories and mishaps with you. And along the way, we'll all learn how we can return to travel in a way that's better for us and for the planet. So hit that subscribe button, because season 4 of Alpaca My Bags, the Responsible Travel Podcast, is coming this October. It's available everywhere you find your favorite podcasts.
And we're back. Now, before we get into our story, we just want to say that while our tone is light in the intro, we do take the topics we're discussing very seriously. We are best buds, and we love chatting together every week and turning it into a podcast. We want to share that passion with you and to create a vibe where all of you feel like our best buds too. We joke about us friends forming a cult or commune, but that's not to diminish the severity of actual cult activity, which we do occasionally talk about in our weekly stories. We feel it's important to open up and talk about even the darkest aspects of humanity and the downright scary things that come up in the news. But we want to make it clear that our intention is never to sensationalize, and we always try to deliver these stories with respect to all parties involved or affected by the crimes we discuss.
We always post our sources in the episode description, so you can do some digging on your own if a story we present piques your interest. But you should know that if you ever feel we get it wrong, either in our tone or in the details of the case, we want to hear about it. We are more than happy to make a correction or give an update on a case we've discussed in previous episodes. So feel free to reach out to us at MurderMurder.news@gmail.com. We do have a content warning for gun violence, addiction, drug use, sexual assault, gang activity, and mentions of racism. This week in true crime history marks the 25th anniversary of the death of Tupac Shakur. I remember hearing about Tupac's death back in 1996 because it was definitely a very big deal at the time. It was breaking headlines on MTV, which was pretty much the only place I was getting my news when I was a junior high student and just a kid. And every news station in the US was also playing this story exclusively. And of course, this was in the era before the internet or social media. So it was just absolutely everywhere on the news. And admittedly, I didn't know much about Tupac when I was just a junior high student in a small town in Ohio, again, without social media. And I honestly never thought about it again until I listened to Esther Ludlow's episode about him on Once Upon a Crime a few years ago, and was really fascinated by how much I didn't know and about how big of a situation it was. So in my mind, he was a rapper, but he was actually so much more. We want to start off by getting to know him and his history because he really was an iconic figure. Before we dive in, we also want to give a shout out to our sources for this week, including the incredible Esther from Once Upon a Crime, and also the book The Killing of Tupac by Cathy Scott, The Las Vegas Sun, Rolling Stone, Biography.com, LA Times, and tons more. Please check out our show notes for all of our sources.
Tupac was born on June 16th, 1971, in East Harlem, New York. He was born as Lassane Parish Crooks, but his mother, Afeni, was a founding member of the Black Panther Party and changed his name to Tupac Amaru when he was a year old. He was named after Tupac Amaru II, an Incan revolutionary who led a rebellion against the Spanish in Peru. His father, Billy Garland, lost contact with Tupac when he was 5, and he didn't see him again until he was 23 years old. Afeni, along with 20 other members of the Black Panther Party, were charged with conspiracy to bomb police stations and several other places around New York in 1970. The group was nicknamed the Panther 21 and faced a 300-year prison sentence. She was known for being bright and represented herself in the trial while pregnant with Tupac with no legal education. She apparently did an amazing job because she was acquitted of all charges, along with all of the other members of the group after an 8-month trial. She left the party after her trial and married Tupac Shakur in 1975. They had a daughter together, Sakia, and the two were then divorced in 1982. Afeni struggled to keep a job and had a really hard time providing for her family, in spite of the fact that she was clearly a really smart woman. When he was 10 years old, a minister asked Tupac what he wanted to be when he grew up, and he responded that he wanted to be a revolutionary. It was such a big answer from such a small kid, but he had grown up poor in really rough neighborhoods surrounded by gangs, and the concept of a revolution to put an end to the poverty in his community was all he had ever known.
He discovered his love of acting when he was just 12 years old. His mother sent him to a community theater group in Harlem, where he got the role of Travis in Raisin in the Sun at the Apollo Theater for Jesse Jackson fundraiser. He was a natural on stage. In 1984, Tupac and his family moved to Baltimore at the age of 13. In 1986, he auditioned for a position in the acting department at the Baltimore School for the Arts. He got into the school, and all of his teachers remembered him as being a gifted actor, poet, and dancer. He even took ballet and played the part of the Mouse King in The Nutcracker. While at his new school, he met actress Jada Pinkett Smith on his first day at BSA while she was studying dance and theater. The two would become lifelong friends. He started to toy around with rap while at the school and began calling himself an artist. Tupac referred to his time at BSA as good luck times.
Outside of school, life was more of a struggle. Afeni was having a hard time providing for her family as a single mother, and their electricity was often shut off. The neighborhood where he lived was violent, and he later referenced that people were literally starving. In 1988, his mom moved Tupac and Sakia to Marin City, California, after a neighborhood kid was killed in a gang shooting in Baltimore. She couldn't afford 3 bus tickets, so she sent the 2 kids to live with a family friend while she saved up for a 3rd ticket to join them later. What Afeni didn't realize was that the area where she was sending her children was just as dangerous and had a similar gang crisis to Baltimore. A couple of months later, her friend who was taking care of her 2 kids called to let Afeni know she was going to rehab for alcoholism, and Afeni pulled together enough money to head to Marin City to join her family. They all settled into a housing project surrounded by drug dealers. It was here that Afeni developed a dependency for cocaine.
Her addiction escalated quickly, and she moved on to crack cocaine, making his home unlivable for Tupac. He left the apartment with Afeni and moved into an abandoned building with a couple of friends. The friends would later form the singing group One Nation MCs. Tupac was always bright, always loved reading, and always did well in school, but he ended up dropping out of high school when he was 17 to work odd jobs. In his spare time, he would read, write poetry, and then turn his poetry into songs. He called himself MC New York. His developing style was, in fact, pretty revolutionary. He used his songwriting to talk about what his life was actually like, which, coming from the 80s where most of the media was about wealth and power, this was super innovative. His lyrics were about being poor and living in low-income housing and what life was like being surrounded by drug dealers and not having enough food. The songs they write were all based on things that had actually happened to them, like being homeless, violence from the police, and being surrounded by gangs. With his friends from his neighborhood, he wrote what would later become his theme song, Thug Life, which was a reaction to what the neighbors would call him and his friends. This was him reclaiming the negative things people would say about him.
In 1989, when Tupac was 17, he met Layla Steinberg on a dance floor in Oakland where her husband was DJing. The two immediately hit it off, and the then 25-year-old Layla had actually just moved to Oakland with her husband to focus on helping at-risk youth. Her vision was to create a program that combined a love of poetry and music and would allow kids to express themselves through writing. The two had what Layla described as a spiritual connection, and she and her husband invited Tupac to live with them. The two got along so well that Tupac officially dubbed her his manager, which she did in fact end up taking on the role. In interviews, Layla wanted to make it clear she was not the Michelle Pfeiffer in this role. She was not a white savior, and she only did what she did because Tupac believed in her. She didn't know what she was doing, and he helped her believe that it was something she could do. Layla had gone to high school with the manager for Digital Underground, which was an Oakland-based dance party group. Digital Underground put out the incredibly catchy song that we wish we could afford to play for you, Humpty Dance, in 1990. And their manager was Atron Gregory. Layla called Atron and told him that Tupac said he was going to sell more records than any rapper ever.
And with that, Atron was like, most records ever, let's see what he can do. He hired him as a roadie for Digital Underground. He eventually became a background dancer because let's not forget about his love of dance from his Baltimore days. Atron has described his time on stage as demanding attention. In 1991, things started to really take off for Tupac. He debuted as a rapper in Digital Underground's same song from the film Nothing But Trouble, which he also appeared in. He also released his first solo album the same year called Tupacalypse Now, which is such a great name.
Oh, yeah.
So good. Tupacalypse Now covered topics like racism, police brutality, poverty, and teenage pregnancy. The album did not have much commercial success at the time, but Pac was just getting started. Tupac put out 3 more albums between 93 and 96 with songs like To Live and Die in LA, Dear Mama, California Love, So Many Tears, and Hail Mary. At this point, he's a very big deal and a household name, even for kids in small towns without the internet or social media. He worked with other big artists like Snoop Dogg, Notorious B.I.G., who was also murdered not that long after Tupac, we'll come back to that later, Dr. Dre, and so many more.
And since he was really so multi-talented, he was also acting during this time. He was in Juice in 1992, A Different World in 1993, Poetic Justice in 1993, Above the Rim in 1994, Bullet in 1996, Gridlocked in 1997, and Gang Related also in 1997. That's a lot.
Yeah, a lot.
While things were going so well for Tupac's career, he served time in prison after being convicted of first-degree sexual abuse in 1994. Tupac had been seeing Ayanna Jackson, and the two had hooked up a few times. She met him in his hotel room on November 18th, 1993, and he had a couple of friends in the room with him. Ayanna and Tupac went back to a bedroom where she began to give him a massage. His friends came back to the bedroom, and he told her he decided to share her with his friends. Ayanna struggled, but ultimately the 4 men raped her while Tupac's road manager, Charles Fuller, watched. Tupac maintained his innocence until the day he died, but he was found guilty of sexual assault, and he served 9 months in prison. So this brings us up to this week in true crime history, the day of Tupac's murder. On September 7th, 1996, Tupac was in Vegas for a big fight. The fight was between Mike Tyson and Bruce Seldon at the MGM Grand Garden Arena. The fight itself was a big deal, and the event was part of Showtime's pay-per-view series by Don King. It was such a big event that all hotels and motels were sold out in the area, and it attracted celebrities like MC Hammer, Charlie Sheen, Louis Gossett Jr., Reggie Jackson, Roseanne Barr, Run DMC, and the Reverend Jesse Jackson Jr. Tupac and Mike Tyson were buddies, and Tupac had actually written Mike's fight song, Road to Glory, which played before the fight. The fight started at 8 p.m. and only lasted 109 seconds, with Mike Tyson being declared the winner in what many have claimed was a fixed fight. But that would not be the most memorable part of this night.
Tupac went to the fight with friend Suge Knight, who was the founder of Death Row Records, Tupac's recording label. The two had several bodyguards with them that night, and two of the bodyguards sat with them at the fight. After it was over, Tupac, Suge, members of their entourage, and the bodyguards walked through the casino towards the entrance of the hotel around 8:30 p.m. Somehow during this walk, they ended up getting into an altercation with Orlando Anderson, a 21-year-old man visiting Vegas from Compton, California. The fight seemingly happened out of nowhere, but we'll break down some of the rumors about what might have happened later on. Here's what we do know happened according to Compton PD, if you can trust their account. They said Tupac approached Orlando and said, "You from the South?" Then he lunged at Orlando and knocked him to the ground. The group, with his entourage, then kicked and hit Orlando. Security guards broke up the fight, and the group moved onto the valet area in front of the hotel. No one from the group was stopped or questioned about the fight, though LVMPD did talk to Orlando. They asked him if he would like to file a complaint, but he declined, so no report was ever filed about the fight by the police.
They walked 15 minutes down the strip to the Luxor Hotel where the group was staying. Tupac was staying with his girlfriend, Kidada Jones, Quincy Jones' daughter, and a sister of the amazing Rashida Jones. He went to his room and changed his clothes. In LA, Tupac would often wear a Kevlar vest and carry a gun, but on this night, he decided he felt safe in Vegas and skipped both. Kidada stayed in her room, but Tupac and Suge went downstairs to the valet to get their car. A tourist got a video of the two chatting with a couple of women while they waited for their car, a black BMW. They went to Suge's West Vegas home at Monte Rosa Avenue to relax and for Suge to change clothes. And they stayed there until after 10 p.m. After they left Suge's house, they headed to an after-fight party at what was then known as Club 662 at 1700 East Flamingo Road. Tupac was set to perform with Run DMC for a benefit that night. Suge was driving the car, and at 10:55 p.m., Tupac had his window rolled down when a photographer took a picture of him at a red light. This is the last photo taken of Tupac alive, and we will definitely have that photo up on our Instagram because it's now so iconic.
At 11:05 p.m., the two are just cruising down the strip. Traffic is bad, like bumper-to-bumper traffic, and they're listening to Tupac's album, The Don Killuminati, The 7-Day Theory, and they're pulled over for playing their music too loud. That is something police do. So a bike cop pulls them over for their loud music and for not having their license plate displayed correctly. The cop searched the trunk of the car, and he eventually let them go without a ticket. And it's speculated that's because Suge was pretty well known in the area and was a bit of a celebrity, so they just kind of let him go without a ticket. Even though they searched his car. So Tupac and Suge aren't alone, but they're in a caravan with their bodyguards and entourage, all driving down the strip together with the others in different cars. So just the two of them alone in that one car, but there's plenty of people out with them. Because of gun laws in Vegas, the bodyguards were not able to arm themselves with guns while protecting Tupac and Suge. Around 11:15, their car is stopped at a red light at Flamingo and Cobalt Lane. A Jeep full of girls pulls up to the left of their car, and the girls get their attention. They chat with them, and they invite them out to the club as their guests, so they're all kind of just, like flirting and having a good time. And just then, a white late model Cadillac pulled up to the right of their BMW. 3 or 4 black men were in the car. A gunman was sitting in the back of the driver's side. He stuck his gun outside of the window and emptied a magazine from a high-powered semi-automatic weapon, firing at least 13 rounds into the car. 5 bullets hit the passenger door, and the windows were shattered. When the shots were fired, Tupac frantically tried to climb into the backseat of the car to protect himself, but he was unable to get back in time due to a seatbelt. Unfortunately, this opened up his side to the gunmen, who shot him in the right hip and the torso. Suge yelled for him to get down, and he tried to cover him, which caused a bullet to graze his neck. In all, Tupac was shot twice in his chest, piercing his right lung, once in his arm, and once in his thigh.
The Cadillac made a right turn onto Covell and sped off. Suge made a U-turn to the other side of Flamingo and told Tupac he was going to get him to a hospital. And Tupac responded, "I need a hospital? You're the one shot in the head." Tupac was having trouble breathing, but he was awake and alert at the time. Suge actually had a Motorola flip phone in the car, but decided to drive to the hospital instead. This decision has definitely been called to question in the years since the shooting. There was actually a hospital in the direction of where they were heading, and it arguably would have been faster to get help from an ambulance. But let's keep in mind that Suge was panicked and maybe just not able to think rationally in the moment. Some of the entourage pursued the Cadillac, and some followed Suge towards the hospital. Now, there are a lot of people who witnessed this scene. You have the bodyguards, including Frank Alexander, Tupac's bodyguard, and the entourage. Frank said he did not get a look at the shooter and could only see that he was a black man and he was wearing a skull cap.
Yeah, and it's also important to mention there that the bodyguards are off-duty police officers. And so like in reports I was reading, they were trained to remember things about these like intense situations. So whereas like the average human's probably not the best witness, like they were trained to witness what was going on and actually like try to look and
so like highly credible witness.
Exactly. But somehow none of the bodyguards, because there were more than the two like in the entourage, were able to identify anybody. But we'll get more into that later. So some witnesses claim that the entourage had returned fire at the Cadillac at the time, but that has never been confirmed. And it sounds like there weren't like shell casing from guns or anything that were ever recovered. So we're not sure that that actually happened. 2 bike cops were in the area when they heard the first shots fired at 11:17 p.m. They saw the end of the shooting and they saw the Cadillac turn right and the BMW do a U-turn back down Flamingo. They rushed to the scene, and here's where the mistakes begin. So right from the beginning, both of the cops pursue the BMW. Now, I can understand that they didn't have a good idea of what had just happened in the moment, but according to the Las Vegas Sun, proper police protocol would have been to secure the crime scene with one of the cops staying there at the crime scene and the other pursuing the car. This was not done. The crime scene was not secured, even though it was standard procedure to do so. A retired police lieutenant from the LV MPD, which is the force that's actually investigating this, has also confirmed that that was the wrong call and that they should have secured the scene. The goal there is to make sure no one is injured, call for appropriate backup, call for an ambulance, round up witnesses, and make sure evidence stays intact. And that was not done. And police didn't even get there until 20 minutes later. And at that point, a lot of witnesses had already left the scene. So this was a very, 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 very big mistake.
Wow. So instead of securing the scene or pursuing the suspect, the police are now following the victims. It's about to get worse. Suge is urgently trying to get Pac to the hospital. He had 2 of his tires blown out from the gunfire and blew a 3rd tire while driving over a median trying to avoid traffic. His car was now stuck, and the cops are ordering them and their entourage out of their cars, forcing them onto the ground at gunpoint. Frank, the bodyguard, had to tell the police that they were the victims of the shooting and not the perpetrators. Ambulances were called, and at this point, Tupac is covered in blood. The police decided the entourage were all blood gang members and took them all to jail. They were not treated as witnesses and were not questioned about the shooting. Frank and Suge lifted Tupac from his car and helped get him into an ambulance. Tupac kept saying, "I can't breathe," as he was taken away. Suge and Tupac rode in the ambulance together, and he told Suge, "I'm dying, man." And then he closed his eyes. Once at the hospital, he was placed on life support under heavy sedation. He died from his wounds in the hospital 6 days later on September 13th, 1996 at 4:03 p.m. He died from internal bleeding, and specifically respiratory failure and cardiopulmonary arrest. Tupac's case is still unsolved to this day, and many believe that is due to the way the police handled the investigation, from not interviewing witnesses to treating some of the witnesses as criminals and losing their trust. It's also pretty wild that the Cadillac the killers were driving was never found, especially considering traffic was bad and how far could they have gotten away?
Yeah, that part really gets me because if we are to believe that the entourage returned fire on the Cadillac, like it's rumors that the car could have had bullet holes in it and they kind of like ducked into a repair shop to get it repaired. I just feel like you can't really 100% repair that damage. Like I feel like if you were...
There should be some record of it or some witness to it.
To it. But I also feel like somebody who really knows what they were doing, unless they replaced like a whole door or something, like I feel like there's evidence of a car being repaired. And I don't know anything about this. So maybe you could completely refurbish the car so no one could ever tell. But I feel like
it depends if
somebody
they have
who knows
a
what they're
car
doing.
Guy, but...
Yeah. Like on the police force, I imagine they could have somebody like look at a car and be like, this had bullet holes in it. Like... I don't know.
No, I mean, it depends if the perpetrators have a car guy, I guess. Like if they're, have someone that they rely on to do sketchy car. It's just so wild
because like traffic was so bad. So how did they escape quickly, get the car repaired, and then like
while being pursued?
Like it's too much. Like it just sounds like such a flub that the car was never found.
Yeah.
So let's discuss some possible theories about what might have happened that night. Many people believe that Orlando Anderson, the man from Compton he fought with that night, was actually the one who killed Tupac. There's some pretty good evidence and rumors to back this up, and he was the prime suspect for a Compton detective investigating the case. Let's start with the fact that he was supposedly a member of the gang known as the Southside Compton Crips. Orlando had been in a fight at Lakewood Mall several months earlier. He, along with his entourage, assaulted Trevon Lane, a member of Death Row Records. During the assault, he stole his Death Row chain, and there was rumored to be a rivalry between Death Row and the Compton Crips where they would get a bounty for collecting these Death Row chains and like actually taking them from people wearing them. So, So supposedly Suge and Tupac knew about this fight and felt very disrespected. And this is not confirmed, but supposedly that night Tupac attacked Orlando was because Trayvon was with Tupac and recognized him as the person who had assaulted him. He whispered that supposedly to Tupac as they're walking through the casino, that Orlando was this guy, and that's what made Tupac flip and go and attack him. There were also rumors that Orlando was bragging about being the one who shot Tupac, which he denied. Like, he has been interviewed. He still says he had nothing to do with it. And he was once arrested in Compton for a shooting in Las Vegas, but was never actually charged. And police did not say that it was for this particular shooting at the time. They hadn't announced it to the public, but it's kind of believed that they were taking it so seriously that that's why he was arrested.
Wow. There's also a theory from former LAPD detective Greg Kading that Sean Diddy Combs commissioned Orlando's uncle, Tupac, and Suge for $1 million. He discussed this theory in his book about the murder of Biggie Smalls. In a recent documentary, Dwayne Keith Davis claims to have been in the Cadillac that night and confirmed that Orlando was with them that night and that they were looking for revenge because Tupac had beaten up a fellow gang member. He did not say Orlando was the actual shooter and just said shots came from their car. Whether or not Orlando was involved, we may never know because he died in 1998 during a gang-related shootout.
It does sound to me like all roads lead to Orlando. And it's like there's so many different theories about what could have happened, but he seems to be at the center of all of them. So, you know, if this case was ever actually solved and we found out it was somebody else, I would be pretty surprised if he was 0% involved. So some believe that Biggie Smalls was behind a hired killing of Tupac based on a rivalry the two had. They'd actually previously been friends, but things soured between them in November of 1994. Tupac, Biggie, and Sean Combs were supposed to work on a project together, but when Tupac got to the studio, he was actually gunned down and shot 5 times in the lobby. He did fortunately survive that shooting, but he believed Biggie knew about the shooting, and that's how the rivalry began. There doesn't seem to be any evidence that Biggie was actually involved, but some believe he could have been, and that could have been a reason because of this rivalry, which is all documented in their music and stuff. Like, after that, they did not like each other.
Still others believe that Suge either had Tupac killed or was actually the intended target of the murder. Tupac was a rising star, and it was rumored that he was going to leave Death Row Records. Suge wasn't going to just let him walk away, and he had planned the shooting that evening. That's why some say he didn't call for help from his cell phone, and why he kind of acted erratically after the shooting. The last theory that we have to touch on, because it's referenced so often in Tupac's murder, is the idea that he faked his own death and is still alive. Conspiracy theorists love to point out that Tupac had a love for Machiavelli, whose treatise, The Art of War, has been said to advocate for faking your own death in order to manipulate an enemy. Tupac definitely seemed to have interpreted the work the same way and had the stage name Machiavelli, which was spelled slightly different, in his album, The Don Killuminati, The 7-Day Theory. The album sleeve had a reference, Exit Tupac, Enter Machiavelli. This theory is popular, and there are supposed Tupac sightings to this day. There was a documentary made claiming he faked his death to live among the Navajo in New Mexico. Some believe he's living with an aunt in Cuba. Kim Kardashian even made an Instagram post in 2012 claiming she spotted him. And that is the life and death of Tupac Shakur. Wow.
Yeah, it's incredible. And, it's funny. I hadn't really heard many conspiracy theories about Tupac potentially still being alive and that he faked his own death until I was talking to a friend of mine, from LA, and like her best friend, who's like a stand-up comedian, like 100% believes he's still alive. And she'll hear that there was like a sighting of him in Thailand. And she's like, I gotta go. Like, I have to get on a plane right now and like go check this out.
Oh my, that's intense.
Yeah. And, it's interesting because I feel like it's like that with, a lot of, I feel like this only happens with men, but like important men, like you have like John Lennon and
like
and Elvis and Jim Morrison and whatever.
Yeah.
Like, I think it's,
yeah, it's true. It's really true. There's a lot of people that they just don't want to let them go, I guess.
Right.
But it's ridiculous to like, I think we should look up how often people have been found to have faked their own death. Like, is that even a thing, or is it just a hopeful daydream?
I would love to do a special on faked deaths because I think it's a really interesting phenomenon.
Let's please do that.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Awesome. We'll gonna do that. You know what? Let's do that for Patreon.
Yes. Ooh, great idea. Yeah. Patreon. All right. Yes. Coming soon.
Excellent. We got a plan. Yeah.
Yeah. But this one is interesting because he would have had the money and resources to disappear if he wanted to. We've mentioned before, like, this is at the dawn of the internet and before everything was electronic, before cell phones, or like at the dawn of cell phones. So like it was easier to disappear. But also, like, I had read an article when I was researching the, the disappearance thing to see if there was any evidence of it. And it's mostly kind of hokey stuff. But Suge Knight was even interviewed not that long ago and asked what he thought about that theory. And he's like, well, honestly, that makes the most sense to me because he was like so awake, like the last time I saw him, like when he was in the ambulance, when we parted ways in the hospital, he seemed so alert. And he didn't get to see him.
Yeah, but he said he couldn't breathe.
Yeah, he said he was struggling to breathe, but he said like he was so wide-eyed and like he just finds it hard to believe that the turn happened that quickly. And I believe the only person who actually saw him when he was in the hospital was his mother, Afeni. So Suge did not see him because he was dealing actually with like legal issues that we didn't touch on with Orlando. Like Suge had a... I think like he wasn't allowed to like, he was on probation or something. And like the fight with Orlando actually ended up getting him in quite a bit of trouble. So he wasn't able to go see Tupac in the hospital. So I don't know. I mean, obviously it's a little wild and I don't quite think that's true, but it was interesting to hear that was his interpretation instead of being like, that's the worst idea I've ever heard. Yeah. He's like, maybe. So he was the last guy there.
Yeah, that's always interesting to hear. Yeah. Right. But I'm surprised there's not more conspiracy theories, more popular conspiracy theories about, just like police or former police sort of having him killed, and that could happen in the hospital or with the shooting, like either way,
Yeah, it's
just not letting him recover or, going in to talk to him, and who knows,
Yeah, it's
especially
certainly possible. And I mean, they just really mucked it up so badly. Like following after like the victims and pinning the witnesses to the ground. Like they lost so much trust that way with the witnesses. Like it's just really terrible to hear. And, in reading the great book I read, Killing Tupac by, I forget, we mentioned at the beginning, by Cathy something. In reading her book, she talks quite a bit about how like the missing piece here is witness testimony. And like so many people were there, and like there probably are people who saw the shooter, but they did not trust the police. And I can't blame them for not trusting the police in this incident, or ever in life.
For sure.
So,
for sure. I mean, there definitely has been a lot of talk about the police just having it out for Tupac in general for a long time, because he was so vocally anti-police brutality, and it came across pretty anti-police, right?
Absolutely,
and
right.
There was some talk about police informants infiltrating his crew and stuff like that. So, that's a sketchy little side note, I guess.
Yeah, really interesting. And, I wouldn't be surprised. This past week, I watched a documentary on Netflix. I can't remember what it's called, but I watched a documentary about Dennis Nielsen, and I think it's called the Des Tapes or the Dennis Nielsen Tapes or something, but it's on the front page of Netflix. It's right there, and it's really good. I know a bit about him already, and the focus is less so on uncovering the crimes, which is it's such an interesting way if y'all don't know much about him, that he was actually caught. It was really fascinating. So they do touch on that, but it's a lot of recordings he made in prison, just writing his own book and being a creep, and it's just really gets under your skin. It's a really tough watch, but a good watch.
Those types of criminals are always so creepy but fascinating. The ones that just even by the time they're in prison, just want more and more attention and just start putting out, art or books or tapes or, their philosophy or something like that. And it's just oof, why?
He
this is
loved
horrible.
the
Just let
attention.
it, you'd think you would just want to let it go now that you've been, caught and you're in trouble for
No, he's a big time talker. And it's always interesting to me, when, sometimes serial killers don't want to reveal anything about what happened. Ted Bundy absolutely was denying what happened until supposedly the very last day before his execution. But he wanted to get into like all the details and relive it through storytelling and through telling the police what had happened for Dennis Nielsen. And it's just so creepy.
It's really a double-ended sort of thing, because it feels like it's definitely positive that we get to hear some of these stories, because psychologically speaking, we can understand a little better sort of what type of people can do these things and where it comes from, but it's at the same time, you don't really want to give them that attention that they're clearly so desperate for by watching these things. But I don't know. It's hard.
Well, he's dead now, so he's not getting any attention. But so definitely go watch it. It's really good.
I haven't watched anything, so.
No worries. It's interesting how there's these dry spells, because I've been watching so many great true crime things with having our shows we've already talked about. 9 Perfect Strangers is still on and going, and
that's the thing. We're just watching new episodes of this stuff.
Yeah, and that's it's so nice. I really hate the idea of watching one episode a week. It just does not work for me, but that's what I'm doing. No. But man, I had plenty of time for TV this past week, and I that's all I did. I just watch TV and watch those shows, and it felt really pleasant to order food delivery to my hotel room and watch some murder shows.
Yeah, classic.
Yes.
I guess that's enough murder for one week. If you need more MMN, you can always find us on the OG MurderMurder.news for the latest breaking true crime news articles every day of the week.
You can find us on Instagram at MurderMurder.news, on Twitter at MurderNews, on TikTok, where we just covered a really interesting murder in true crime history that I'd actually never heard about before. It was an actor named David Bacon, and it's really interesting because it's the 1940s. He was an actor. There's like all this like glamour as he was married to a singer. He knew Howard Hughes and
those kind of stories. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a really interesting one. So please definitely go check that out.
Yeah, and they thought he was stabbed with a stiletto, which I've never heard of happening. That's so interesting.
And I can't tell if they really believe that or if it was like the salacious 40s newspapers. Like it was
That's how the media got hold of things and ran with
right?
it. Yeah.
So I'm not sure how accurate that was, but please believe I included that detail in the TikTok.
So if you're not already following us on TikTok, you definitely want to find us at MurderMurder.news. You can also find us on Facebook, where we have both our page and our group, and you'll want to follow the page to keep up to date with all things true crime and chat with us about the latest stories or anything you heard on the podcast. And then you can join our group to stay in the loop about any special events we might be having and any information you need about our next book club meeting. Right now, we're still reading the new Jim Crow, and we'll be meeting to talk about that on Zoom on the last Sunday of this month.
Great. Well, thanks for stopping by and hanging out with us on this lovely Friday. And we hope you have a wonderful weekend, and we'll see you next week.
Bye.
Bye, friends.
Murder, murder,